I was lucky enough to get to catch up with Jeremy Siskind at our NCKP booth last week. Now, I actually got to see Jeremy perform and got to chat with him in person at NCKP 2019, but it was great to catch up with him virtually in this case and to talk about all things pop piano teaching, as well as a little bit about piano arranging and a great tip for students who are struggling to make their arrangements sound really rich and full. Jeremy even performed for us a little bit and gave us some examples on the piano throughout, which was really wonderful. I hope you enjoyed this interview. It was such a treat for me to get to catch up with Jeremy. And you can find out more about Jeremy as well as get his books at jeremysiskind.com. And we'll leave a link, of course, in the description below. Now let's get into the interview and hit that like button if you enjoy it. I wanted to talk to you first about your pre-conference day, which you were sort of the host for, or the overseer, I guess, of the
Yeah.
pop day. Is that a particular area of interest to you? Why are you passionate about the whole area of teaching pop music?
Yeah, so it's not so much me as my committee. So I chair what we're calling the creative committee, which we deal with basically anything, off the page or being created onto the page, improvisation, composition, arranging. And so pop kind of falls into our area. And as we were kind of looking at um, applications, topic proposals, we saw some energy around pop music and thought, in this year that's been the drabbest of years, that having, a topic that was a little bit lighter, maybe a little bit more fun, that might energize teachers in a different way would be really useful. And we happened to get this great connection with Shane Adams, who's kind of a world-class teacher of songwriting. And so it just seemed like a slam dunk. And I don't know, pop is so interesting to me. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, but like as a piano teacher, I feel like so many piano teachers do it somewhat kicking and screaming, or, it's kind of the vegetables that you have to eat to then be able to like have your dessert and like, okay, I can teach Mozart because I taught this kid an Adele song, or whatever. um, and, I don't know if that narrative needs to change, but I think some of the themes around the pop day were, hey, if we're going to teach this music, we should teach it well.
Mm.
Right? Like not just like, okay, go and play this big note pop piano piece, but how can we do it better? B, if we're teaching it, we should make sure students are really learning skills through it and not just kind of barely getting by. Then three, maybe that it's a great opportunity to foster creativity, whether that's in students writing their own pop type songs, whether it's we had a presentation on using improvisation through pop music, through it was particularly through K-pop music, which was just so interesting to me, kind of seeing where that's going in society. And yeah, use it as a springboard for something really meaningful, powerful, positive in our studios, and not just kind of get by and do 5 minutes of pop so that then we can do 25 minutes of scales and and Mozart.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it just like it fosters all these opportunities for our students, and I think that we as teachers can make some commitments to honoring it for what it is and doing it maybe a little bit better.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the way you put it. I almost would have thought of it from the opposite perspective from the student side, that it's their dessert is the pop
Yeah,
music.
yeah, right,
Right?
exactly.
That they slog through all these classical pieces. Hopefully they don't feel like that about it. But sometimes it's framed that way, that they have to get through their list ABC as we would have over here, right? Their baroque and their classical and their romantic. And then they can have a pop music for their summer project. And that's
Right.
just it's so divided, you know?
Yeah, and it's also just a tough thing too because so much of that music just doesn't sit well on the piano. A lot of it is not. And I happen to like be a. I really enjoy pop music. I'm really interested in it. But like objectively, a lot of pop music these days is not melody based, right? It's about the rhythms. It's about the timbres, the sonic textures, the way that a track maybe grows, and so it often is really hard to work on piano, and so I think we need to kind of look for the pieces that do work really well on piano, and B, need to figure out ways to to do justice to this music, and bring it into the studio, even if maybe the traditional melody, harmony, arrangement breakdowns like don't apply. And so we had some interesting, presentations about ways to just keep the accompaniment or just the chord progression to appease, to bring in different kind of sonic opportunities to play along with recordings to help you keep rhythms. So I think there are opportunities, but there's a lot of challenges to being a really to using pop well in your studio, I feel like.
They definitely are, yeah. And with teachers going into it already not being in love with the idea, many teachers, of teaching pop music,
Sure,
and then
sure.
it's just not an intuitive teaching experience for them because the music is so different. And as you say, but even more basic than that, like the rhythms, once you write them, they weren't written down in the first place. And
Right.
when once they're written down, they're
Absolutely.
impossible to read, but the kid knows how it goes. So
Hmm.
sometimes they're just taking the wrong approach.
Right, yeah, and it's interesting to think about how much you can lead with your ear, instead of on the page, which I think it's great to have places in your teaching where you're doing both, right? Somewhere you really want to focus on the reading, and somewhere maybe it's great to say to somebody, I know that rhythm on the page, it's not exactly what you're used to hearing. So go ahead and play it like you're used to hearing it. Or maybe they can play something that would be above their level in terms of reading, especially with, some of the syncopation like you are kind of referencing.
Yeah.
But they can rely more on their ear. So I think there's opportunities.
Absolutely. There's opportunities in everything. We just have to look for them. Um, I don't know if this came up at all on the date, as I didn't see the replays of everything yet, but one of the things I often get from teachers is they actually want to teach pop, but they go to their student and they ask for what they want to learn, and they just say, oh, something I know, or pop music. And then the
Hmm.
teacher is at a loss because they don't listen to anything they think their students will listen to. So, did the topic of sourcing this material come up at all?
No, I think that's interesting because it came up in one presentation kind of, exactly as you described it, that it was kind of like, well, you should ask your students what they listen to and what they're interested in. But I do feel like, especially for a lot of younger students, they're not making choices about the music that they're listening to, probably until they're turning at least 11 or 12, maybe 13. They're kind of listening to whatever their parents have on, what's on the radio. So they might not have that kind of knowledge and insight. And then, like, so I have more questions than answers to your point. I
Yeah,
think it's
no,
a
that's
very good
fine.
point. Like, I feel like the music world, 15 years ago, everybody was listening to the same things more or less because there just weren't that many platforms. And now there's so many platforms that what in the top 40, like the younger people aren't even listening to that, right? They're listening to like whoever the TikTok, or SoundCloud artist is who's like on their radar. And so I think it does get harder that, whereas once upon a time the publishing company could put out like, here's the top 50 songs of 2021. Now it's like everybody's listening to something different. So it does require more flexibility and creativity on the teacher side. Either to say like, okay, here's a Taylor Swift song. I think it's pretty good. All my students are going to learn this, even if they don't know, or to be more in tune with what the students actually want, come up with their own creative arrangements of those pieces. Um, but I think it is a little bit harder now than ever to figure that out. It's less and less obvious to me.
Yeah,
And I feel like that's actually happening across the board. I'm curious what you think, but with my jazz students, even, you know they're listening to something completely different because it's just coming from a different source. It's like, this is the person on Instagram who's got a lot of followers, and I'm like, wait a second, like, in my day it was, who came out with the newest album, but like people aren't even coming out with albums anymore. It's like they're just putting out like a thing on Instagram and that's it. And I'm not saying it's bad, but it is just harder to like figure out like, okay, what's at the center of our culture, what's the thing that people know.
yeah,
um, it's becoming, I think, more diversified by age. So, yeah, we have to be really on our feet and nimble as piano teachers.
yeah, for sure. And it's so true what you're saying about it being all split. I mean, the top 40 was a top 40 because people had less choice because there was so much radio
Yeah.
thrown in your
Yeah,
face. Whereas
exactly.
if you're not getting that, if you have your AirPods in all the time and you're listening to your own choice of music, it could be anything. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I think even, I mean, having those conversations with the older students who can tell you what they're actually choosing to listen
Hmm.
to, and then letting that inform what you then introduce your younger students to, even if you're just using the elements of those songs to teach to
Hmm.
your younger students rather than the full song, which, you might get into inappropriate lyrics and things, so you have to be careful there. But um,
Hmm.
letting that inform the kind of fundamental concepts or little riffs or things that you teach your younger students, just so that it's in the right vocabulary.
Yeah, I think that's got a lot of wisdom to it. But yeah, it's definitely tricky.
Yeah. Well, that's why the ongoing conversation is so important. Was there anything else that came up on the pop day that you thought was interesting or that surprised you?
It was interesting to me how many piano teachers were interested in songwriting, and how many showed up to the songwriting intensive workshop, and kind of were willing to give it a go. We kind of, as a committee, as we talked about it, we had a very friendly debate about like, okay, it's a piano conference. Like, is songwriting a part of what we do? But I think it is. I think students want to write their own songs. I think a lot of teachers want to write their own songs, and uh, yeah, it was kind of energizing to see just how much people were interested in being creative, how much they were interested in helping their students. Um, and yeah, I feel like we all left that songwriting workshop feeling like I could do this. And for me, it was just very energizing. Like, oh yeah, I love writing songs. Like, this is really fun. This is really nurturing. It's one of those things that just feels so good for the soul. It's like it's less pressure than writing a poem that has to be like the words have to be amazing, and it's less pressure than writing a piece of music where the music has to be amazing. You kind of just have to put them together. Not that it's easy, but it kind of like takes a little bit of pressure off of both. It's like if
Yeah.
okay, if the melody's like good enough and the lyrics good enough, then like cool, you could have a good song.
I
So
love
anyway,
that.
I
It's
was
like
just kind of
spreading the
excited.
load. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. And also, you know, like as musicians, I think it requires this other level of vulnerability to put down a
Mm.
lyric. I think that's scary for people. And it was just kind of cool to see a lot of teachers in the audience not only being willing to do it, but being willing to share and kind of put themselves out there and be vulnerable. And hey, if there's anything we've learned in the last year, it's like life's short, man. You gotta seize the bull by its horns. So yeah, it was just cool to see people willing to give it a go and write a lyric.
Yeah, that's incredible. I actually did a songwriting project in my studio
Oh,
last
great.
semester. So every single one of my students wrote a song last year, and we put them together in a big album, and it was just so wonderful. And some of the lyrics are pure silliness from an 8-year old,
Sure.
but some 6-year olds will come out with something that you think, oh my gosh, that is so
Yeah.
profound. How did you do that? So you can produce incredible results.
Totally.
I'd love to hear more about your session, which, as we record this, is upcoming. Which is
Hmm.
about, is it called "My Arrangement is Better Than Your Arrangement"
It
or something
really,
like that? Is
yeah,
that
it
right?
really makes me sound like a jerk.
No, I loved it. I thought it was very
Yeah, I
funny.
think it's called "My Piano Arrangement is Better Than Your Piano Arrangement,"
Yeah,
and then in parentheses it says, "And here are the secrets."
nice.
um, yeah, do you want me to just talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, well, I've one question from the outset because I read the description and I saw that
Oh
you're
yeah.
going to use Danny Boy as your inspiration. Is that right?
That is what the ad says, but I have pivoted. But
Okay.
I pivoted from Danny Boy. I do love Danny Boy, and I wrote this book called Playing Solo Jazz Piano, which uses Danny Boy in large part because it's in the public domain, right? It's something that I don't
Yeah.
need to get copyright for. So it uses Danny Boy as kind of the example. So I've already gone through a lot of different versions of Danny Boy and how you could put it on the piano.
Okay. Yeah, no,
So I'm
I was
sorry to
just
disappoint
interested
you.
to see that there because I mean, from an Irish person, it's just like, oh, why did you choose that song? And I also heard that I used to do folk exchanges. I was an Irish dancer. We did folk exchanges,
Wow.
and we had a singer who traveled with us, and she sang Danny Boy at every show.
Hmm.
So I
Uh-huh.
heard it just on a loop when I was
Well,
like
are you
12,
familiar with the
13.
great jazz piano versions of Danny Boy?
What?
Are you familiar with the great jazz piano versions of Danny Boy?
No, I'm not. Like, to me,
So
it's just an Irish folk song. Like, I
yeah,
hadn't
if you've
thought about
never
it from that
heard,
perspective.
so Bill Evans was, I think, the first to record it. Incredibly beautiful version. And then Keith Jarrett has also recorded it, and there's a YouTube video of him playing it. Stunning.
I'll have to look that up.
Just some of the best, most beautiful piano playing you've ever heard. So and anyway, that's part of why Danny Boy. It is kind of, obviously it's primarily this folk song, but it has come into the jazz tradition as well.
Okay, cool. So tell us what you've pivoted anyway. So tell us what it's actually going to be about now.
Well, yeah. So I'm just fascinated about the number of ways that you can take a simple melody and chords and put it onto the piano creatively. And I think that there's so many places where this touches a piano teacher's life. One of the most important to me is for student compositions. So often I judge a lot of student composition competitions, and students will have a really great sense of melody, good chords, etc., etc., but it'll just be arranged in this very basic way that kind of ruins any chance at sounding like a more sophisticated piece. Or conversely, someone will try to have this kind of really flowing two-handed arrangement, but then there won't be any melody. And so, I'm really interested in ways that we can take, our two hands and our basic technique and make all these special things on the piano. And so I'm actually going to be using an example. Well, the story is, which I'll share at the beginning of my presentation. When I was a freshman in college, I was invited to perform in this Women in Music festival. Obviously not because I'm a woman in music, but it was women composers. And so I was assigned to play God Bless the Child by Billie Holiday. And I went and took some lessons with teachers, and they said, well, come up with, an interesting piano arrangement of this piece. And I had a lead sheet, I had the melody and chords, and I just kind of sat there. I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? It's like, I could play chords, I could play the melody. What am I supposed to do with this? And so since that time, I've had a lot of opportunities to learn about arranging for piano and study it in lots of professional ways that I've been arranging. And so I'm going to spend about 45 minutes showing, probably hundreds of different ways that I wish that I'd known as a freshman in college, that I could take this basic melody, basic chords, and put it on the piano in any style, ranging from, jazz, blues, Debussy, Chopin, triads, four-part hymn, very orchestral sounding, or just kind of go through it all. And it's I like my presentations to just be filled with content. I hate these presentations where they have two things to say and then they really dig into them slowly. I'm gonna give you 50 ideas, and I hope that you remember 3 of them by the end. So that's kind of the plan. Is I'm just gonna show a million things that you could do if you were me in my freshman year of college, and hopefully you'll walk away with some inspiration and a lot of ideas about arranging for the piano.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I like your approach. It immediately called to mind. Do you know that game where you've a circle that's made of Velcro and then a ball and it has to stick to the circle? Is that familiar?
I think so. Somewhat like darts. Like you
It's kind
throw
of
a
like that, but
ball.
it's like a tennis ball, and it's a kid's version of darts, essentially.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah, I just imagined you throwing like
yeah.
50
Yeah, throwing
of these
those
tennis balls
exactly,
with
hoping that they
Velcro.
stick.
Like 3 of
Yeah,
them
and then
landed. It's fine.
yeah, exactly. And hopefully I'll give everyone my slides, and hopefully that will help more tennis balls to stick up there.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess I could play Danny Boy for you. I feel obligated. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about, is what I call, well, taking closed position voicings and turning them into open position. I think this is probably like the number one thing that you could do to make your piano arrangement sound more sophisticated. So by closed position voicings, I mean that the voicings are under an octave in span. So triads are your classic closed position voicing, right? So right, even if you do nice inversions, your triads, it's never going to sound that great. Yeah. So I think, the most obvious way that people kind of go about doing this, and I absolutely support this, is moving one of the notes into the right hand, right? Instead of just, maybe you're playing, right? And I'm taking this G natural in my right hand, and I'm playing an octave on bottom. And notice that it also lets us get a lower bass note too. And this is a big deal in piano arrangement, is keeping the bass as low as possible, because then you get all the reverberation kind of going up. So now I've got basically a 4-part piece, right? 2 notes in each hand. So, I kind of call this shared hand voicings. And if you want to make it jazzy, then you can basically add more notes in the middle. You can add all these extensions instead of, Same basic idea. Like, my hands are essentially in the same position. I'm just filling in lots of extensions, right? Now, another way to do this is through what I call shuttling, right? And so when you're shuttling, you're moving between 2 functions in one hand. So with your right hand, you'd be playing the melody and then going down to the chords. And this kind of allows you to keep the bass really low. So it could be, this melody is pretty low anyways. Maybe it's a better example if I go up. So you see my right hand's shuttling back and forth between melody and chords. Or the left hand can shuttle, right? And so when the left hand shuttling, it's going back and forth between a bass function and a chord function.
Yeah.
And probably the most classic, shuttle is stride piano or ragtime, right? Which I don't want to insult your folk song, but just bear with me.
I won't be insulted.
But there's a ton of other patterns where you would shuttle in the left hand as well. One of the most famous is called the piece pattern. And this is from a Bill Evans composition that's called Piece, where he goes bass, chord, chord, bass, bass, chord, chord. So you could do that same thing. And it's calmer, right? And in fact, there's a Hank Jones recording I really like, and he does that kind of piece pattern, and he plays the melody in octaves, kind of at the upper register. So now I'm using the whole piano, right? It's not just this kind of shared hand voicing thing in the middle register. Now I'm going really low for the bass, really high for the melody. But there's so many other ways to do a shuttle too. If you think of the different kinds of patterns, I think it's kind of a romantic trope to do a lot of repeated notes. remove some notes, or we could do more on the bass side. Um, so that's kind of interesting, right? We could add a lot to the bass. We could syncopate. Sounds kind of like bossa nova. In fact, there's this Brazilian style called choro, which is like, which is really fun. It's like their ragtime. So the left hand could shuttle, the right hand can shuttle, and lots of times we kind of actually split. It might be that the left hand does some shuttle here, and then as the right hand finishes a phrase, that comes down. So some jazz pianists call this the third hand approach. That it's that between the two hands, it's like you've got that third hand in there.
Yeah.
And I promise I'll shut up in a second, but kind of, I think of the opposite of shuttle as being draping. So instead of alternating between two functions, to do those two functions at the same time. So usually I think of draping from the melody. So, you could come up with chords that you play. Or if I was to play the melody lower. Right, I could have the chords at the same time as the melody, and that creates a totally different effect, right? And I could have the left hand shuttling while the right hand drapes. So good. Combine these elements, right?
Yeah.
It's very simple. On one hand, you have bass, you got mid-register chords, you have melody, but depending on how you want to divide them between the two hands, you have so many potential options. And I'm just scratching the surface, but that's kind of, those are the three basic ways that I think of going from a closed position voicing to an open position voicing. Making the shared hand voicings by bringing one of the left hand notes to the top, shuttling either from the left or from the right, and then draping usually from the right hand melody downwards.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. That's a wonderful overview. And I mean, it's a wonderful tip in general, just the upper level of closed to open. When you have a student that is stuck with something and it's just sounding, I mean, we all know the sound, it's like blocky and clunky and everything is smushed. We just need to get them to open it up.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes it's intimidating, and like I get it. It's intimidating because it's harder to play. Because you have to have, one hand doing multiple functions at the same time. But I think one of the things that I've learned about piano arrangements, and of course it's easier said than done, is that it's okay to write things that you can't play yet. That just like you want to have a piece, a classical piece or a repertoire piece that you can't yet play, it's okay to write something that you're going to have to work into a little bit. And those can be some of the best opportunities to stretch our students. If it's something that they've created or that you're creating along with them, it's so motivating to be like, oh, it's going to sound so much nicer if I can just hold that thumb while I play the melody in the upper fingers. So, I think, obviously, some younger students won't be ready. But as you start getting towards your teens, it just is going to make their own compositions, their own arrangements sound so much better if you can get into open positions.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And like you say, it's totally fine to write things that you need to practice. It's a great reason to practice. And you can still, if you are working with a student, you can still be there to guide them when they're writing something that's impossible. If they're writing something that is unplayable, you won't be able to play it either. So they'll be able to see that. But If you can do it, but they can't yet, that's great motivation.
Yeah, totally, exactly. And maybe that's the perfect time for a piano duet for a little while,
Yeah,
or something like that. But yeah, I think there's all these opportunities, and it's one of the things that I love most about the piano. Is that there's just so many different ways that we could portray the same piece, and the same basic material. And I just think it makes this instrument so exciting.
fantastic. That was such a treat to see that in so many different ways. And we can
Oh
see
well,
how we
just
can look
wait
at
for
lots of
tomorrow
different levels.
morning.
Yes, exactly. I'm waiting for the 50 ways. It's going to be
Yeah,
awesome.
exactly.